What do the guides say is coming in 2023, and are we going to be all right?
I don't know that we're going to make it comfortably. The guides teach lifting the world, a world made new. One of the claims they work with is the claim, behold, I make all things new. You are manifesting your reality as you see it right now in a collective agreement of the world that is also choosing. So the opportunity of this time is to look at the density that we're experiencing as an opportunity for change. It's shocking to me that this stuff has worked so well.
Magically, baby Hana has appeared. How does it get any better than this? Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wondered what the guides say is coming for the new year, then do we have the Resurrection Show for you. Today I'll be talking with my all-time favorite medium and channel, Paul Selig, and the guides about 2023, resurrection, and realizing the world in a new way. So welcome back to the show, Paul. Are you ready to shine?
I'm ready to shine. Thank you.
Woohoo! And I understand you have some good Maui sunshine. We're inside today because of implements of destruction, but you have some beautiful Maui sunshine to help you to shine.
It's a beautiful day here, and my neighbors are doing construction, which is why we're not sitting out. Yes.
That's okay. But with that said, we'll bend this in a very serious direction. What do the guides say is coming in 2023, and are we going to be all right?
You know, the guides don't do predictions. I'm not one of those psychics that tells you the annual list of things that are supposed to happen. I mean, the guides are teachers, and they speak about larger gestures and larger motions. So they haven't done anything about 223. They've talked about the times that we're in, and they may want to talk about what's coming, but it will be news to me because it's nothing that I've even thought to tune in on. It just doesn't occur to me to work that way.
What do they say are the times, big picture, that we're in right now?
I'm going to go to them if I can. I'm on my second cup of coffee. I usually don't channel till about cup number 4, so we'll see how we do.
The reason we didn't do earlier today is I wanted to make sure, and I told your publicist, it's mine as well, I said, I want to make sure he has enough coffee on board. So 2 apparently is enough. Next time we'll do 4.
Fine. It's my fault. Let me see if I can tune into anything, and we'll see what we get. I'll say, if you haven't heard me before, if your listeners haven't heard me before, I whisper and repeat. So it's a little challenging at the beginning sometimes for people to follow. We don't say 2 things. They're saying we would like to say 2 things. Where you stand today as a collective. Where you stand today as a collective is in a reasonable place. Is in a reasonable place of choice. By reasonable, we mean it can be so. By reasonable, we mean it can be so. You can claim what you choose. You can claim what you choose. The real equivalency here will be what you're choosing, will be what you are choosing, and the method of choice, and the method of choice, and the method of choice. If you choose to operate, in a trajectory of fear, what we predict will not be what would be the highest, will not be what would be for the highest, not least, not in the least. If you choose from a place of reason, we may know ourselves anew. We may know ourselves anew. We may claim ourselves anew. The path will open for the human race. And what we mean by that is really very simple. When you choose in fear, you claim a path of fear, you claim a path of fear. If you're always in reaction to a possible outcome that you believe is detrimental, you'll always be operating in a maze. You will always be operating in a maze, in the belief that fear is at the center of the maze, and a belief that fear is at the center of the maze and must be avoided. The maze is of your own making. The maze is of your own making. When we teach our students, we say 2 things. When we teach our students, we say 2 things. Lift to the upper room, which is where choice is made without fear, and realize the inherent divine, in all that you see before you, in all that you see before you. The reclamation of the divine we see, the reclamation of the divine in what you see will clear the path for you. Because it is you who obscure God when God is indeed present, period. And they're saying period.
So many directions I can go with that. And thank you to the guides in particular. With that said, it's a time period to me where things feel heavier than ever. It may not be that way. It just feels that way. There is a lot of gloom and doom being spewed out of the volcano, so to speak. And I use that, in a sense, literal rather than metaphorical. But it's a very heavy time. And at the same time, people are saying, okay, Paul, I want to go to the upper room. However, even if I make a choice to go to the upper room, if the collective agreement is to stay in a place of fear, does it really make a difference?
Well, of course. I mean, my experience right now is not of a world that is dense and heavy, and most of my life, I have to say that was that experience. So I'm certainly not pretending to be ascended, or holier than thou. It's just not my experience. And it could be if I want to align to that. So what the guides I work with say is that, people talk about manifesting. I'm going to manifest my reality as if it's something other than what you have right now. You are manifesting your reality as you see it right now in a collective agreement or collective accord with the world that is also choosing. But when you lift to the higher, when you make that choice to align to the higher, what you claim is altered because what is available to you is different. So the old metaphors that the guides have used is, well, if you're living in a basement and you've got a transom window and that's the worldview you see, you will confirm that in every way, shape, or form that you can. All I get to see are dirty feet out my transom window. If you go to the 50th floor, there's a different view. Now, I think what you're saying is, well, as long as there's other people that are, operating in the lower, we're all going to be stuck in the lower. The opportunity for moving to the higher, I believe, is that you become the doorway or the portal to the higher. So the guides teach lifting the world, or a world made new. And one of the claims they work with is the claim, behold, I make all things new. That is not an invocation that's done by the personality self who thinks he or she is really spiritual. So I'm going to go lift things because I'm spiritual. It's a claim made by the aspect of the self, which they call the true self or the monad or the Christ within. You can call it anything you want. I don't think it really matters. But that is the part of you that claims this and can claim a world anew. So the opportunity of this time, I think, is to look at the density that we're experiencing as an opportunity for change. It's not like, well, here's some mud. Other people are rolling around in it. I'm going to join them and we'll all roll around in the mud together. The idea of the New Age idea of you create your own reality, which I actually think has great merit, I think is a partial equation. I think we're also operating in a collective field. So if I live in a town where the water has been poisoned, did I poison the water? Was that me creating that? Well, we live in a world where people get to poison the water, if they're going to do it. So that's collective accord. So if you look at the self or the personality structure that you hold, that I hold, that reads the paper and decides what is so based on what he or she is told or has the reactions to what one is told in the old ways, we're going to just perpetuate the old. The personality structure, I am told, knows itself through history. It's basically a compilation of historical data, how my parents treated me, the era that I was born into, the science of the times, all of these things that inform how we see the world. And the true self, they say, the monad or the divine self, operates beyond time and space and history. So it is not conditioned. It is not claimed in fear, because the guides say the true self doesn't even know fear. It doesn't exist at that level. So when you lift to the upper room, you're actually lifting consciousness or your vibrational field. And consequently, what's available to you, if I understand the teaching, is a world made new. And I don't think that this is spiritual bypassing or painting things pink when they're really dark gray. I really don't think it's that at all, because the guides say to know something is to realize it. And the actualization of something realized is the benefit or the change one incurs. So when you claim at the level of the monad, behold, I make all things new, you're actually shifting reality. And again, it's not a platitude. It's not a mantra. It's what they call a claim of truth. And the guides say what is true is always true. It's rarely convenient. It's not convenient that this person that I never want to see again is of God, but that's the reality. You know what I mean? It's not convenient. It's not what I want to hear. But if I want to put that person in darkness, I can do it. But the guides say again and again, who you put in darkness, what you put in darkness calls you to that darkness. So when we're being invited as a collective to witness the darkness, does that mean we're supposed to confirm it and agree with it? Now, I don't think anything gets changed until it's seen. You know, the guides have said for a long time, if you have a dead body in the basement, eventually it's going to stink up the whole house. So the process of exhumation, or the process of seeing what we've created in fear, individually and collectively, is, I'm going to say, not more than moderately unpleasant. Because who wants to look at their stuff? Do you know what I mean? But I was going to say this, I don't know if this is going to make sense, but if you've had a rock in your shoe your whole life, you're used to it. You're used to the pain, and you're not going to move that pain unless you take the damn rock out. And you're not going to take the rock out when you're pretending it's not there and that it's not informing your journey. I think if any of us took 2 minutes, I can do this right now, and looked at all of the areas of the life that are informed by fear, and I asked the light to dim in accordance with that, I would be in a really dark room pretty fast. Because most areas of my life are tinged with fear. The guides talk about it as a taint on a lens. And a lot of what they're doing in their teachings now is clearing the lens so that we're not recreating the old stuff. So just because everybody else is saying gloom and doom doesn't mean that I choose to or have to. And that's not me being Pollyanna, because, I mean, you've known me now for years. I'm a curmudgeon and often, gloomy. Thankfully, that's not my experience.
I think the gloom has been beaten out of you, Paul.
You too. It's shocking to me that this stuff has worked so well. Because for a long time, I was just saying, well, I'm along for the ride. I'm the radio, and here we go. And this is what they say. But my own experience is continually being altered. Anyway, I speechified, which I did not intend to do in response to your question. So.
This was both beautiful and it's not a deliberate shameless plug, but I was teaching last night in my School of Mystics exactly what you're saying right now. It comes from different channels. It's the same stuff. And I like to put, it may originally, the inception point may originally be you and your guides. Or the guides, I like to think of it in musical terms. Mm-hmm. So you go to the upper room, you're playing a higher note, you're vibrating at a higher octave, so to speak, or singing at a higher octave. That raises the music of the entire symphony. Just by being you, or just by being your true self, your sound goes up. Or you could say the crappy music that was being played, suddenly you come into coherence and you're playing better, smoother, clearer music. That has an effect on everyone without you needing to try to make it better for everyone else.
That's exactly right. I mean, you're speaking about entrainment, and the guides speak about that without really using the word, but it's the same idea. So the guides say there is one note sung in the entire universe. The one note sung is, you can call it God, they call it the word sometimes, but they say that one note is actually in manifestation, articulation is all things, and it's all operating at different levels of vibration, but it's still source. So remembering source where it's been denied reclaims what you see in the higher octave. When you lift to the upper room, the guides speak about how the world is changed by presence and being. They often say how one serves is how one is most fully expressed as the true self. It doesn't mean you have to go, become a Reiki master, open a yoga studio. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. You can do whatever you want. But when you're operating at the highest level, what you call to you will be in accord. And also, I understand you're operating in some ways as a transistor to lift what you encounter. And that's the gift of the teaching. You become the doorway to the higher.
Thank you. And I want to go back to a word you used a while ago, because I was teaching last night how, to me, all fear, none of the fear is actually ours. It's been gifted to us. We've chosen to accept it. It came from our forefathers. It came from our parents. It comes from the news. It comes from wherever. But at the end of the day, I call it love or source, universe, God, the monad, I believe. You can call this anything and everything. But you are not fear. That is not your true self.
No.
And if we can remember that, then we can let go of that history. We can let go of that which is not ours, and we inherently go up.
Yeah, I completely agree. The guides finished dictation on their 11th book in September. And they're calling it the Book of Innocence. And I'm going, what the hell is this? And what a trip. And it's a trippy book. It's of the books, it may be the trippiest. And I still haven't read the whole thing.
I've got to interject. We'll bookmark it, but I've got to know why it's the trippiest. But first continue, and then I want to hear that.
Well, the aspect of self that they call the true self is innocence.
Yeah.
It's untainted. They talk in this book about sin, or the idea of sin, or the misunderstanding of sin, which they say is just the denial of the divine, outpictured in different ways. It's every place where we deny source. You can call that sin if you want to. It's not this wicked, terrible thing that we've been instructed in. It's a basis for experience that we've aligned to. So the reclamation of innocence is actually the reclamation of the self that is fearless, the true self. The true self, they say, or the God within, is without sin or without blemish or without fear. And fear, they talked about this when I would do workshops and the guy would say, God is all things. And somebody wisely would raise their hand in the workshop and say, well, what about fear? And the guide said, well, fear is of God too. It just denies it. That's all, because it can't be not of source, but it can believe. So the guides say God is present in all things, but that's not often been my experience of walking around on this planet. But that doesn't mean it's not so. It means my experience of source has been obscured by the denial of the divine, which the guides say is the only real problem that humanity has. Is how we deny the source of all things and its presence, its active presence in ourselves, in the ones before us, and in the world.
Years ago, decades ago, if I'm honest, I was Olympic Training Center trained athlete. At the time of Lance Armstrong, I went over to Europe before him. I'm racing bicycles in France, trying to make it to the Tour de France. I'm in the Swiss Alps, or French Alps, right on the Swiss border. And a safety official has his safety wand out. There's a large crowd around this traffic circle. And he waves the American through. Vous allez, American. Allez-y, allez, allez. Ooh. Right into an oncoming car that had come out an alley and ended my bid in my career heading toward the Tour de France. At the time, I specifically said, God is dead. There is no God. How could this have happened to me? 6.5, 7 years in and out of pain centers and, PTSD for a good decade plus. Close your eyes. There it is happening again. And guess what? A couple decades later, that was probably the greatest single gift to shift me in this direction. And I know that was source. It came from source. It couldn't have been anything other than the exact opposite of what I thought it was.
I mean, my experience was comparable. It wasn't as immediate and as dramatic, but it was as challenging. And I had very, very, very hard years. And And I look back on it now, which is interesting. And I only realized this recently. I actually look back on my thinking in my life even 5 years ago, and I go, boy, that was hard. And boy, I let it be hard and lonely and painful and lots of other things. I also think, though, and it's important to understand that we have choice and we're honestly accountable to our choices. So the fact that God is all things doesn't deny us our responsibility to what we choose, how we choose it, because people do fairly heinous things. And the basis for all of those things, I understand, is fear. It's fear in acting itself. But the action of fear, the guides always say, is to claim more fear. And they look at every choice I've ever made, you've ever made in fear, more than likely you'll see it got more of the same. And that continues to be true today. And I think it's true at a collective level as well.
Thank you. I want to go back to the trippiest in a minute, but you said something very interesting. Only 5 years ago, it was hard. I let it be hard.
Yeah, I expected it to be hard, and it was hard. You know, I remember when I was maybe 27 or something, and I got invited to a healing circle that somebody was running. I was just opening up spiritually. And, you know, I was intrigued and excited, but I wasn't buying a lot of it. And somebody went around and they said, okay, everybody just, do a little meditation. You're going to see your spiritual path unfold. And people went around and said, oh, I'm walking and the sparrows are singing and, the rainbows are there.
I love it.
I'm like rolling my eyes at them. But you have to understand, I'd been through addiction, near homelessness. I mean, I was a psychic train wreck in those years. Everybody else had a spiritual path that was rainbows and, bluebirds flying around. My path, I had a pickaxe and a rope, and I was climbing up what looked like the witch's mountain in The Wizard of Oz, I mean, this black mountain. And the thing is, I was proud of myself. I was proud that it was so hard for me. But I don't think that I am anticipating pain in the way that I did. I also, in my case, had to get thrown out of a life that was somewhat entrenched in habit. I was nearly a lifelong New Yorker. I was used to living in apartments and, hard winters, and I was an academic. I was a college teacher, and that's how I self-identified. And, my spiritual work, which was becoming public, 5 years ago, and a little longer than that, it was a deep challenge to move publicly into what I do now, because I'm a shy person and I'm a private person, and I knew that I would be opening myself up to a fair amount of ridicule and, other problems. I was also opening myself up to an amazing life. But when I got rerouted to Maui, which is really how it happened for me, it was totally divine intervention when I look at it. And I've never been so grateful for anything, because there is no way on earth that I would have chosen it. I would have chosen my familiar pain because I was comfortable in it. It was my soup of worry, my soup of discord, and I liked it. That's what I knew. I didn't know that I really could have something other until I did. And then I started having to be really grateful. And I spend most of my days now really grateful. I have to say that.
I can look back and our interviews where it was, I think, maybe one apartment to another, with the same people living on the other side of the wall, with the same noise, with the same challenges, until one day you were like probably one of the last flights out of the country for at COVID time. You got down to Costa Rica, and that was it.
Yeah, I did. I had noisy. I've moved about 4 times because of noisy neighbors in New York, and I have sort of supersonic hearing, I've been told. I mean, you can drop a spoon in the next room and I'll jump out of my chair. So that's just how I'm wired. But I work as a clairaudient. That's what I do. But yeah, I was in Costa Rica and I couldn't go back to New York because it was on lockdown. And a friend said, come to Maui, and found me a little tiny house to stay in. And I thought I would be there for 2 weeks and go back to my life. And I never went back, really. I mean, I moved.
The guides use the term know yourself anew. It's one thing to talk about doing it. You did it. How did you allow the old patterns to slough away, fall away? I mean, these are deep grooves in the records. To allow yourself to know yourself anew.
Well, it's still happening. I'm not done. You know, I still have my dark nights. I mean, I'm not going to pretend. But I have to say, I became willing to have another experience of myself outside of my expectations for what I've been. I mean, I moved to the jungle, really. I live in the rainforest. I'm learning how to drive still. I'm terrible. I failed the last test so badly they wouldn't let me take it for another month, but I am learning how to drive so I can actually make it to the grocery store and do things like that. But I had to be challenged outside of my comfort zone. And I also think I had to become willing here to receive love and kindness in a way that maybe I hadn't allowed prior, which is really interesting for me to think about. But I was met with love here, you know, and community and things like that I had been wary of. You know, I'm not a joiner. You know, I often say I'm not a bad host. I can show up and do a channeling, but I'm not a great guest because I'm going to stand in the corner with my little plate and, you know, eat it and hope somebody talks to me. I mean, that's how I've been. So how is it done? One of the things the guides are teaching now, which is really trippy, and that's just a lot of what the Book of Innocence is about, is the role of memory in our experience. And you talked about those deep grooves, and those deep grooves are really experiential. And they say that we have limited source, and deeply, when they're talking about a physical reality being altered, they're actually talking about a potency or a level of vibrational accord that alters matter. But it's hard to do that when you're operating through a system of memory that has been claimed in separation. So the guides say the belief in separation, that you and I are separate, that we're separate from our source, has informed pretty much every memory we have. You know, it's there, it's part of the filter. And so every time we try to reference our own history, we're referencing it through that bias, which holds the lack of spirit or the lack of God or whatever you want to call it. So the reclamation of memory is one of the things they're teaching now, and how we're made new, not by pretending something didn't happen, because it's not about that. I would never say you weren't hit by the truck when you were on the bike. It happened. But how we frame these things in most ways is informed by collective reason and agreement about what things mean or should mean, because that's been the dictate. And, you know, if you look at the culture of our country, or any country, I suppose, those things are altered. You know, there was a time, which I wasn't born into, when it was very fashionable to be overweight. And I spent much of my life being overweight and hardly fashionable, but it was a look for a period of time. And now I'm not the way that I was. But when we're not endowing things with the meaning that we have been instructed in, we get to have a new experience of them. And, you know, I mean, if somebody were to say to you, well, here are 2 rings, this one's worth $1 million, this one's worth 50 cents, you're going to go for the $1 million ring because you think you should, and you've been told it's more valuable, even if it's not. Even if they're just both pieces of rock and somebody's decreed one is valuable or important, and another has said, no, that's useless and meaningless. So we're living in a world where we do this all the time, and we have, I think, banded together in our belief systems that are informed by things like lack and separation and privilege, and this idea that one human life can possibly be worth more than another, which in my opinion is completely ridiculous. And the guides have said it many times. That is, nobody higher than the next. You know, nobody. You know, you all have the right to be. You were born, you have the right to be here. And I think what we do with that time is up to us. And I think some lives may be harder. And I'm certainly not diminishing anybody's experience of a hard life. I've had one, you've had one, everybody has one in different ways. But I also think we get more choice perhaps than we think about how we get to show up in the world, and how we treat ourselves is a big part of that. And if you're treating yourself like crap, more than likely you're not treating other people terribly well either, and vice versa.
What is the first step? And thank you for sharing, and thank you for really sharing from the heart today, Paul. What is one first step that people can take? We are bombarded with one message right now more than anything else. You're not worthy.
Yeah. Well, let me go to the guides with that. I hear, well, you're not worthy when you agree to it. What choice here? You have choice here. It's really up to you. It's really up to you. Your merit is not your worth. Your merit is not your worth as ascribed by others. So how do we know ourselves as worthy? Saying this, yes. The guides wrote a book. I think it was the third book that they channeled through me. It was called The Book of Knowing and Worth. And I really like that book. It's a lovely, gentle, loving book. And they spoke in that about how our belief in our own unworthiness is part of what's limiting our experience of source. That we can be here, we have a right to be here, we're worthy of that as much as the next person, because why wouldn't we be? And so they've addressed it there. And they also say we're always ordering off of the menu of what we expect to receive. So, I am now 61 years old. I'm learning to drive. I'm in a different body than I was in a year ago. I'm trying to navigate the world with a skill set that I really didn't develop in some ways, and I can say, well, what a wonderful adventure to be on. Or I can say, oh my God, I'm so behind. Oh my God, I'm never going to get it right. I'm too old, too wrinkled, whatever you want to say. But, this is where I'm at. And I gotta say, I can choose to learn from this place and learn my worthiness, experientially. And some of that is the real simple claim, I have a right to be here. You have a right to be here. And you're not what you've done, and you are not what you've thought, and you are not what your parents said you were or are, or your culture says you must be. None of those things really are true, but they're agreements we make. And mostly when we make those things our gods, I'm as good as my bank account. I'm as good as my physical appearance. I'm as good as what the neighbors say about me. We've created totems and false gods that are finally going to fall and crack us on the head, because that's what they always do. Those things that we make God tend to fail us eventually. And then those become the opportunities to really discover something more.
So let's go from there. God is. What does that mean? What's the importance of that?
Well, it's a claim. They call it a claim of truth. They've been teaching this in the last couple of books and unpacking it continually. So when they say the denial of the divine is the only real problem humanity has, that means that we've decided where God can be and where it cannot be. And in doing so, we end up sort of bifurcating a reality or making God something pretty, and they've said for a long time, you've decided that God should be some guy up on a cloud somewhere, and you've denied the God in the mud. When God is the mud, it's your body, it's all things, So the claim God is, in some ways, I believe, is a claim of restoration, and it's a claim of realization. To realize something is to know it. So when they teach it, they bring you to the upper room, which is a level of vibration where things happen quick, and they're pretty palpable. You can feel them. And the claim God is a claim of truth, where you're basically reclaiming the inherent divine where it has been denied. You can't make something holy. It already is, but you can deny the divinity in anything. And this is really what I understand, which banishes or the light shines upon the darkness and dispels it, reclaims what has been held in darkness into light. And, the idea that God is a magic wand that's going to prettify things is not what they're talking about. It's a realization of what is always true, which is sort of the one note song. In the channeling you said that you listened to from the other day, I read it, I go, oh, brother, they're talking about moving beyond time again and how things are reclaimed in the higher accord, and it's trippy stuff. And, I was interrupting that channeling every 3 minutes with my questions.
For those who aren't familiar with it, you were interrupting every few minutes with your questions without even having to interrupt with your questions, meaning you didn't actually have to say anything to interrupt. The guides are like, well, Paul.
Yeah. Well, I don't remember it that well, but yes. And that's what happens because they're hearing my thoughts. Mm-hmm. And when they say Paul is interrupting or Paul has a question, they're responding to my concerns. But one of the odd metaphors they use, which they'd never used before, was about our idea of cause and effect. And there was some metaphor about water boiling. And, it takes time for the water to, Paul says, it takes time for the water to boil. And they said, it also depends on how much heat is there. And there's also a level of reality when the water's always boiling or the water is just source. So we have these levels of sort of diminished understanding of form and what's possible described by the reality that we've been in accord with. And I understood what they were saying. So I think when they're saying God is, they're going to the claim, which is the water is source. It's not just H2O in a pot with a flame underneath it, and everything is that one note sung, and the realization of source, God is, they say, is a claim of rectification. It resurrects the inherent divinity that has been denied or is operating in a dormant state.
Thank you. So let's play in the trippiness for a minute. Maybe the guides will need to come in and help us with this a little bit. They use, or you use, an example in this teaching of if you have stolen something.
Oh, yeah. I had a hard time with that. I'm still having a hard time with that. Are you still responsible for it? Well, yes, you are. You're responsible for what you broke it, you bought it. But they do talk about reclaim when you go, and this was the teaching that followed that. So you're claiming something from a weekly series that builds on each other. Yeah. And yet last night when they were channeling, or my afternoon here and evening everywhere else, they were talking about the causation and understanding why you stole or why you did what you did as being imperative to the transformation, so that people don't think that they're again waving a magic wand. But they were saying that the ramifications of an act can be altered through the realization of the presence of the divine at the time the event was occurring. Which is, you've decided God can't be there, but if you know that God is there because God operates beyond linear time and space, you can also alter the ramifications or the outcome of something.
Let's go trippy. So, all right. You stole something. At that point, you operated probably from a level of fear, but you stole something. Yeah. Now, you hear this talk between you and I, this great conversation. And you say, well, if I can realize things anew, if I can go to the upper room, then did that experience still take place? We're getting to karma now. Mm-hmm. And did everything that followed because I did that experience still have to take place?
They're saying yes and no when you understand karma. When you understand karma as an opportunity to learn, you may bypass a repercussion. You may bypass a repercussion if a lesson is in fact claimed. If the lesson is in fact claimed in a higher octave, in a higher octave. In other words, you're not playing in the low field. In other words, you're not playing in the low field. Cause and effect of cause and effect. You have lifted to the high field. You have lifted to the high field where fear is not operative, where fear is not operative. Paul is interrupting. Paul is interrupting. interrupting. Does that mean we go upstairs? Does that mean we go upstairs to get out of trouble? To get out of trouble. If you believe you're getting out of trouble, if you believe you are getting out of trouble, you are still operating in fear. You are still operating in fear. There is no trouble except that of your own making. There is no trouble except that of your own making when you realize your endeavors. When you realize your endeavors in source, without denying source, you claim the presence or the action of the divine. You claim the presence or the action of the divine upon the incident, upon the altercation, upon the debt, upon what was enacted in fear, upon what was enacted in fear. You're not fixing anything. You are not fixing anything. You are re-seeing all things. You are re-seeing all things. He interrupts yet again. What about the teaching of karma? What about the teaching of karma? There is a level of cause and effect. There is a level of cause and effect where you are present and having to learn through its encounters and having to learn through those encounters. When you realize the divine self, or the monad or the Christ, or the monad or the Christ, which is without blemish or blame, you're actually reclaiming the self beyond karma. You are actually reclaiming the self beyond karma. You're not going to get out of trouble. You are not doing this to get out of trouble. Imagine you were rolling around in the mud. Imagine you were rolling around in the mud in the lower field. You go to the higher, you are cleansed. You go to the higher, you are cleansed. The ramifications of the mud are no longer present, You indeed have been made new. You indeed have been made new, period. And they're saying period.
Forgive me. Where do you struggle the most with this one?
All of it. All of it. All of it. I get it. The guides aren't the first people to talk about moving beyond karma. I'm not a Hindu, I'm not, my friends here are, my friends are Hanuman devotees here on Maui, and I love them, and they understand this stuff, and they can explain it to me better than I know it. I just know what the guides teach. And, the teaching that there is this aspect of the true self that is, you can call it the Christ or the monad or the true self that is without sin or blameless. I think this idea has been worked with in religion, but I think perhaps in a way that is maybe confused. You know what I mean? It's not the get out of jail free card. What it is the realization of the aspect of self that operates beyond the old system. So again, it's the difference between the basement view and the view from the 50th floor. It's not that you didn't steal the bread if you stole the bread. I don't think it's that. But I understand that the realization of the divine in the act, in the self, and what they just said, if it's accurate, is if the lesson is learned, the ramifications may be altered, because you're not going to continue to incur the lessons until you get it right, which is, I understand, what karma has a purpose for. People think it's punishment. I hear it's just teaching. It's a way to learn.
It's exactly how I look at it. It's a lesson. That's all it is. It's not hunting you down to hurt you. If you get the lesson, it stops. If we have an opportunity to move beyond a world of cause and effect, or beyond a world where we've reclaimed out of oops rather than reclaiming out of our true self, what would that mean? What would that look like? I'm opening up to, where can humanity go from here?
They've said, in the last year in a number of lectures, that it's going to take 4 generations for us to have a very different experience. And I mentioned that to somebody. I was in a car with a couple of people that don't know the guide's work, but they knew what I did, and they were bemoaning the fate of the world. And they said, well, what do your guides say? And I said, well, they're saying it's going to take 4 generations, but we're getting through this. And that it may not be pleasant for a period of time, but it's a time of great change. And they said, well, it's interesting. They said, Moses, took the Jews out of Israel. It took 40 years, they said. And they said, somebody said, which I did not know, they said it took 40 years for them to forget that they had been enslaved. And I thought, well, that's really interesting when I go what the guides are now teaching about memory, because they're talking about not being reliant on the systems that we have utilized that are basically indoctrinated in fear and a belief in separation. And political systems and all systems that really, monetary systems that are really have become tainted with fear. I mean, the guides have said, there's nothing wrong with a bank. There's a reason for a bank. But when something becomes informed by fear, and greed is fear, it's just another depiction of it, it's going to need to be reseen or made new or altered in a higher way. And we're very busy trying to maintain a status quo that's faulty as best we can because we're frightened of what exists beyond that. And I think with good reason. I don't want it. Absolute change is terrifying. But let me ask where we go. Where we go is where we need to go to face ourselves, our own creations, and our own creations. You're accountable to creations. You are accountable to all your creations, individually and collectively. The world you abide in, it's indeed a creation, is indeed a creation. You're all party to that. You are all party to. When you stop investing in fear, when you stop invested in fear, demanding to be right, not being wrong, demanding to be right at the cost of another being wrong, you can claim the kingdom. You can claim the kingdom, or the realization of the presence of God, or the realization of the presence of God, of the presence of God in all things. But you must become willing to change. But you must become willing to change, to be made new, which quite simply to allow God, which is quite simply to allow God to be as you, work with you, align you through itself. You are not becoming God. You are not becoming God. You're not denying. You are just not denying it. Now, to deny God is to pretend you are not holy. Now, to deny God is to pretend that you are not holy. You are indeed holy and always have been. You are indeed holy and always have been. The lie is that you are not. The lie is that you are not, or those you are not, or that others that are different from you are not. All is holy or nothing can be. All is holy or nothing can be. What was claimed in darkness, what was claimed in darkness or made in darkness or made in darkness and acted upon in darkness and acted upon darkness is what you are now attending to, is what you are now attending to. And even these things will be reclaimed in light, and even these things will be reclaimed in the light and be supported so that they may be re-supported or known anew, to see God where God seems to be most absent, to see God where God seems to be the most absent, is claiming the kingdom, is to claim the kingdom where it's been most denied, where it has been most denied. That will alter reality in ways you cannot see yet. That will alter reality in ways you cannot see yet. And your willingness to do so is key, and your willingness to do so is key, period. And they're saying period.
Thank you. There's a few key words in there. Willingness is one of them. Going back to 40 years or 4 generations, do the guides say humanity is absolutely going to make it through the darkness?
They said, we're going to make it. And I was happy to hear that. To hear we have a choice.
Yeah.
And I do get we still have a choice, but they say we're going to make it. Now, I don't know that we're going to make it comfortably. I don't know that it's going to be a swan boat ride. I really don't. And I don't, winter can be hard, and you need it. It has its business to do. Night is challenging sometimes, but you need it. I get all that. So I don't know that it's all supposed to be, the Thanksgiving Day parade. I don't know that. But I do think the change is challenging. Puberty is challenging. You come out on the other side with a bit of a different body and, all those things. But we, I think, as a species are being altered, and I think that's part of what we're in agreement to. And that's part of the journey that we're on.
I like that. And it makes me think Maui. Maui was hard, actually, without a true winter, because you kind of lost that sense of time, and having that cosmic pulse, sort of like electricity, alternating current, actually helps you to grow. The leaves fall, the leaves come back. That pulse, which we were like, no, I want to hold on to the leaves that I have. What if there are better leaves waiting for you?
Listen, I'm not complaining the lack of winter. I've done my share, and I'm sure. So I'm not missing that one. But I just think that, there can be a belief sometimes that we're supposed to be happy all day long. And if you're dealing with a physical challenge as you have, it's a little more challenging. I didn't know Ram Dass. He was gone before I moved to Maui, and I've been really fortunate to be connected with the satsang there. And when they talk about him, they talk about his greatest lessons coming at the end of his life when he was disabled and lost speech, and that he really got it. But they also told me the story of him laying in bed and after a stroke and saying to Maharaji, why, and then being told that his true lessons would begin, or something like that. I'm not the one to be quoting this, but I understand that there's context, for the challenge can be useful, and it doesn't mean that things are all screwed up. Sometimes things just need to change, and it's uncomfortable.
From what I've understood, the level of agreement that we're at right now says that we need that discomfort for growth. We need that discomfort to learn the lessons. But I've also heard that once we reach a certain agreement, there are other ways to learn.
Absolutely right. I completely agree with you. Like fear is a teacher. It's not the best teacher. We can learn our lessons through fear, but we don't have to. We can choose our way. Absolutely agree.
Thank you. If I went to the guides right now, I'm very curious. What is the one most important thing or lesson or teaching that they want to imbue on people who are listening here today?
I'll go. I would like to say only one thing. You are not alone. You are not alone. And don't believe you are. And stop believing you are. You've never been alone. You have never been alone. You are as loved as you can ever be. You are as loved as you can ever be when you avail yourself of love. When you avail yourself of love, you avail your birthright. You avail your birthright. The source of all things knows who and what you are. The source of all things knows who and what you are. To claim I am known, I am known, I am known. To claim I am known, I am known, I am known will benefit many of you well, will benefit many of you well. You think you are in a shadow. You think you are in a shadow. It is of your own making. It is of your own making. Let God be God. Let God be God, and let God know you as you truly are, and let God know you as you truly are. If you don't like the word God, you don't like the word God, choose whichever word you wish. Choose whichever word you wish. You are still loved. You are still loved exactly as you are, exactly as you are. Period. And they're saying period.
On that note, you have a few very special events coming up. I brought them up here so that I can mention them. So you have, if I get this right, Discovering the Truth of Who You Are, and that's at studentsoftheguides.com, and that is coming up in LA, which means you're going to be traveling on February 4th, 2023. Mm-hmm. You have another event, Founders Church of Religious Science. Oh, that's at the Founders Church of Religious Science. Tickets at paulselig.com. And then you have another event, February 5th, Beyond Separation, a Channel day-long workshop at Santa Barbara. And people probably can also find that at paulselig.com, I'm going to assume.
Yeah, everything's up there.
Are you excited to be traveling again?
I am. I've done a little of it. I've enjoyed it. I was back in Costa Rica recently. I loved it, and I was traveling on the East Coast, and I did some West Coast stuff, and it feels good. I'm not going to do it as much as I used to, which was all the time. But, it's nice to get off the island, and it's nice to see friends, and it's nice to see students who I haven't seen for a long time.
How have you, Paul, transitioned from a fear-based place? I'm going to say fear-based place with work. How do I pull this thing all together? How do I do all this? To a more relaxed place where you don't have to force things or be like Sisyphus.
I wasn't like that. I like to work. And I when I taught at NYU and Goddard, I had an academic life and I had community there and students and colleagues and things like that. When I left that world to do this full time, I didn't like sitting alone in my apartment in New York, and I would rather be traveling. And I was also having to learn that I could support myself by doing this work. And I, had given up benefits and retirement. I walked away from at a time when other people are thinking about how many more years they're going to have to work to get retirement. I just said, well, this has been great. I'll see you. So I'm not operating from lack in the way that I used to. And I'm trusting more. But I don't worry. I don't put my energy into the worry. I think that's really it. It's not that I'm not prudent about some things, because I am. And I think prudence is fine. Prudence isn't being fearful. Prudence is it's not time to put in solar. It's going to cost me an arm and a leg. Maybe next year, I'll be prudent, for now. But it doesn't work by being scared. I do say that the one thing that I've done in this work consistently is I've shown up for it when it wasn't convenient and when I didn't want to. That much I've learned to do. And that's mostly because I'm showing up for other people. It's easier for me to do that. If it was just for me, I don't know that I would bother. And when I show up, I can't channel. I'm not sitting in my room channeling by myself. There has to be an active listener. The books are done now as live events in front of people. The recordings are done live. And so I like the community that I get through work, whether it's virtual or live. But yeah, I've shown up anyway, and when I taught at NYU, I would show up anyway, and I liked my work. I liked the classroom. I still like the classroom. The difference is I'm now sitting in the chair, but the guides are the ones teaching, and I'm in the background, sort of like I'm like the guy at the blackboard who puts the lecture notes up there while the teacher is doing his gig, and I don't mind that. I'm happy to do it.
Awesome. And last question I have, Paul, is as you're taking notes on the blackboard, what's been the most interesting, intriguing, or life-changing one to you, particularly as of late?
I don't know. There's too many. I haven't even thought through the last book that they dictated. I haven't read it yet. I suspect the idea that memory is entrenched in separation and can be reclaimed by bringing source energy to memory itself so that it's not being painted or colored by separation. That was a really radical one for me, and I'm still sort of dining out on that one, but it may be a while. But that's the best I can say now.
Thank you. Then I'm going to ask a last, please forgive me, anything that the guides would like to end with.
Thank you all for your presence. Know who you are, what you are, how you serve, and allow God to be God, and allow God to be God. Stop telling God supposed to be. Stop telling God what it's supposed to be, and liberate yourself from the expectations, and liberate yourself from the expectations that have diminished yourselves, that have diminished yourselves and your idea of source and your idea of source, period. And they're saying period.
Thank you, Paul. This has been tremendous. I don't know if you can hear baby Hannah in the background. She's been giggling and singing, and I don't know what else back there. And I'm so glad you could come along on the journey with me as well. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for all that you do. And Paul has been made anew. You have been completely transformed. You're still Paul. You're still beautiful, amazing, loving Paul. But Paul is no longer Paul. So you've been drinking the Kool-Aid and it works.
I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm glad I'm doing it, whatever it may be. Okay, thank you.
For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, check out all of Paul's work, and definitely get yourself to the upper room today. Above and beyond all else, shine bright. Woohoo! So magically, baby Hannah has appeared How does it get any better than this? You want to talk about seeing the world anew and God is, God is, God is? Well, then it is in the hands of baby Hannah who's saying, this looks cool, and the microphone looks cool, and everything here looks cool. And how does it get any better than this? With that said, if you enjoyed the energy, the uplift, the shifting to the upper room, then check out dailywoohoo.com, a place where you can sign up for my daily newsletter channeled from the Guides of Awe to help bring your frequency up, 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 and way up, sort of like baby Hannah here, on a daily basis. That is dailywoohoo.com. Of course, we've also got the School of Mystics. There's a link down below. If you're on your phone, it takes a little bit of scrolling. It's automaticwriting.com if you want to check that out. Baby Hannah is saying it is time to call this good. Here's a link. Here's a link. Here's a link. Somewhere is a link. In the next amazing video. I love you guys so, 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 so much. And wow! Of course. Keep on shining bright. And you know, baby Hannah, I didn't have the microphone on for that. So I'm not even sure how this is going to record, as I was thinking I don't need the microphone on.